So friends, we have gathered on this day that is called Mother's Day in our country. And just to remind you that this particular day was inaugurated back in the 1870s by Julia Ward Howe, who saw, after the horrors of the Civil War in this country, that the women of our country should rise up and be anti-war. So this woman, who was an abolitionist and a writer, wrote a very beautiful piece about disarming and wanting no one to die, any of our sons or daughters to die in war. So it is with that spirit that we have gathered in this circle this day. And I have asked my granddaughter, Sydney, if she would read this piece with me that is not Julia Ward Howe, but it is a revision of a woman named Mary Harrington, who wrote this for Mother's Day.
We bring light to the darkness as we come together today.
In praise and thanksgiving for the gift of life itself.
Someone gave birth to us.
And some of us have given birth.
All of us have been mothered in our time.
All of us have mothered.
Nurturing friendships.
Birthing ideas.
Raising voices against wrongs.
Protecting bodies, minds, and spirits. There is a kind of love we cannot live without.
It is never too late, no matter our age or situation.
We sing a song of gratitude for all the moments
of being known,
being cherished,
being found.
May it be so that we experience that in this service this day by our cherishing and mothering God. Let us first pray in silence.
From the Gospel of John. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is Jesus." When Simon Peter heard that it was Jesus, he put on some clothes, for he had been naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, large fish, 153 of them, and though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was Jesus. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Jesus, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Jesus, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt that he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Jesus, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go where you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." And he said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." Gospel of John.
Amen.
Thanks to Joe for bringing this beautiful picture. Joyce had several of these and gave one of them to some of us. This was painted by Wiley Dobbs, who lives on death row in Georgia, and who is a part of our congregation. And it is, I think, kind of a scene-like scene. So I'm going to add this to our altar as a way of remembering and bringing Wiley into our presence tonight. On the shore of Lake Tiberias, Jesus stood and watched his friends. These were the friends who had walked with him and accompanied him through so much. Of course, we know that they didn't always understand him or keep up with him, but he loved them. He loved them so very much. And I imagine Jesus standing there on the shore that morning, just watching them through those eyes of love as they returned to the work that had been their livelihood before they put down their nets and followed him. I imagine that even though they had been away from this kind of work for a while, that the muscles of their bodies remembered exactly what they needed to do. As they cast their nets into the dark nighttime water and drew them back into the boat, back and forth, the rhythm of this deep muscle memory must have given them some comfort. Even when they drew their nets back completely empty, there was something known and familiar to the work of fishing. And in the midst of so much uncertainty following Jesus' death, they probably needed to return to something known and familiar. They had finally ventured out from the safety and security of the room where they had locked themselves. And Jesus had already appeared to them a couple of times before this. In fact, he had appeared to them within the confines of that very room where they had been hiding, behind locked doors. He had shown up to remind them about the work that they were called to do and to try to address their doubts and fears. The work that they were called to do could not be done in that small room. Eventually, they would have to take a risk and venture out into the world. I don't know if Jesus had a fishing excursion in mind when he urged them to enter back into the world to continue the work that he had started with them. Even so, I can picture Jesus standing there on the beach in the pre-dawn light in that mysterious moment between the darkness of night and the first hints of the light of a new day, with nothing but a heart full of love and compassion for his closest friends. And he noticed that they weren't being very lucky in their fishing efforts that night. And without asking or requiring a single thing of them, he called out to his disciples, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" I imagine the disciples thinking, "Who is this guy?" And in that hazy morning mist, maybe they couldn't quite make out who it was on the shore. That very same voice traveled across the water and encouraged them to cast their nets on the other side of the boat.
Now, as I think about this, I think the water on the right side of the boat is the same water that's on the left side of the boat. And I imagine their boat wasn't very big, but they heeded the advice from this voice from the shore, and they cast their nets to the right. And as they tried to draw them back in, they were surprised to find that they were so full that they were almost unable to pull them back into the boat. And it was at that moment that John suddenly declared, "It's Jesus." It was John who helped the other disciples recognize Jesus when he announced whose voice it was calling out to them from the shore that morning. And in that moment of shared recognition, Peter's immediate response was to put on his clothes and jump into the water and make his way toward Jesus. Now, the others were not quite as impulsive as Peter, and they remained where they were and made their way in the boat across the 100 or so yards back to the shore, holding steady the nets that were overflowing with fish. And as they reached the shore, they were welcomed by Jesus, who was standing by a small charcoal fire, waiting for them, already having cooked a breakfast of fish for them before they even made it to shore with this huge bounty of their most recent catch. One of the things that really stands out to me in this story is the sheer ordinariness of it. The disciples were out doing the thing that they knew how to do best, the thing that they had been doing since they were old enough to learn the trade of fishing from their ancestors. It was everyday, ordinary work that fed their families, work that paid the bills, work that they knew how to do, or at least they thought they knew how to do it. Clearly they needed some assistance in this particular moment. But the beautiful thing about this story to me is that it is, in so many ways, so very ordinary. A man waiting on the beach for his friends, waiting for them to get back from their fishing trip, anticipating that they'll be hungry, preparing breakfast for them. And maybe they'll have some fish to add to the meal, maybe they won't. Either way, it was going to be okay. Jesus was there, ready to receive them and welcome them. You might remember that they had already been shown on this very shore of Lake Tiberias that there was always enough, often even abundance where Jesus was involved. They had watched him elicit enough food from a young boy and the sharing in the crowd to feed thousands in this spot. And I began to wonder if the disciples didn't recognize Jesus on the shore that morning because they were looking for something really big, something dazzling and shiny and flashy, like the transfiguration or the feeding of thousands of people from a tiny amount of food. I'm guessing that they didn't expect to find Jesus making breakfast just for them on the beach. Even Thomas, who had doubted the reports that his friends relayed to him, had placed his hands in Jesus' wounds when Jesus showed up in their midst in the upper room. And given the events surrounding Holy Week and Good Friday and Easter, wouldn't it make sense for Jesus to be making some kind of splashy entrance wherever he showed up? Wouldn't Jesus make himself known in extraordinary ways? Wouldn't he be doing more than just grilling a few fish over a charcoal fire for his friends? Scholars speculate that this chapter of John was added much later to the rest of the book of John. And the details described here were added almost as a postscript to the rest of the book, tying together some of the themes and images that were woven throughout the first 20 chapters of the gospel. But no matter when it appeared as a part of this larger book, from the perspective of the disciple whom Jesus loved, the snapshot of Jesus with the disciples is so tender and full of love, it's almost overwhelming to take it in. His attention was on his friends who were right there in front of him. In that particular moment, he had nowhere else to be. He was surrounding them with abundance that had no strings attached. They didn't have to do anything but follow his lead for their nets to be overflowing with fish. He didn't require anything of them to earn or achieve that abundance. It was pure grace. You might have heard the news that this past week the founder of L'Arche Community, Scott Hardin-Nieri, passed away. He was 90 years old. He founded the L'Arche communities after being inspired by communal life that he witnessed in Harlem in the 1940s. He had served in the army in World War II and had returned to France after teaching philosophy in Toronto. And a friend who was a priest took him to an institution for people with profound disabilities who were pushed to the margins and often forgotten by their families. The priest said to Vanier, "Here are the poor." And in 1964, Vanier took 3 men out of that institution that the priest had taken him to visit and began the first L'Arche community in France. As I've been reading reflections about Vanier that have been offered by so many people this week, I was reminded how influential the Gospel of John was for him in his work and in his life. He wrote extensively about John's Gospel, about how it shaped his understanding of God, of Jesus, and his own understanding of what he was called to do and to be in this world. He points to the fact that the Gospel of John invites us to consider that Jesus cares for each one of us in a very real, intimate, and personal way. Vanier says, the evangelist wants us to remember that Jesus meets us wherever we are. We don't have to do extraordinary things. What we have to do is love and serve others in the name of the risen Jesus. It all sounds so simple, though in reality it is not. In our everyday lives, conflicts arise so easily. Relationships can be difficult. How do I work with others? How do I nourish deep friendships? How do I accept the unexpected and the accidents of life? He says of our verses this evening, this is not the same as the extraordinary event at Cana or the multiplication of the bread and fish. Those events were seen by everybody. Here Jesus is on the shore and he's prepared breakfast for these tired and hungry men. All is so simple and so loving. He cares so much for them. As we reflect upon the ordinariness of what Vanier embarked upon when he began living in community with people at L'Arche, we can see the extraordinary in the most ordinary. One of the things that he constantly emphasized about his life in community was the focus on relationship with the people he shared life with. He reflected the questions that come up so constantly in community were these. Are you my friend? Are you leaving? Why are you leaving? Where are you going? And when will you be back? Vanier embodied the mystery and simplicity of love, the same eyes of love that Jesus looked through as he welcomed his beloved friends to a simple breakfast on the beach. And at the heart of the disciples' questions were these very questions that Vanier reflected on from his own community. Are you my friend? Are you going to leave? Why are you leaving? Where are you going? When exactly will you be back? My friend Melissa Flora Bixler, who is a Mennonite pastor in Raleigh, lived at the L'Arche community in Portland for a period of time, and she wrote this as she recalled meeting Vanier in one of his last trips to the United States. Vanier came looking for Jesus in the neglected. He found fullness of life in those snatched from despair and placed down in homes based on mutuality, respect, and care. As a doctor of philosophy or member of the Royal Navy, a published author and professor, he knew the patterns of success and advancement, but where he discovered life was in relationships that offered instead to undo our desires for power. When he visited a local community, he offered each person a chance to meet with him for a short talk and a blessing. And he was most drawn to the core community members of L'Arche. It was as if he were seeing a beautiful flower for the first time, encountering a gem unearthed from the ground with each person that he met. He wanted to see each of them, to let them touch his face, to sit in the stillness of time that L'Arche makes possible. Vanier made it possible to believe that we actually might be transformed by the gentleness of love. So as I think back to Jesus standing on the shore, watching his beloved friends, I can't help but think that he was watching them as if he were seeing a beautiful flower for the very first time, encountering a gem unearthed from the ground. As he looked upon his beloved friends and prepared this simple meal for them to share on the beach, it wasn't a gourmet 3 or 4 course breakfast. It was elemental and familiar to them, probably not much different than the meals they had every single day. The point was not the presentation of the food. The point was presence with his friends. The point was hospitality and welcome and grace. But this was also a moment of second chances. After John acknowledged that it was Jesus calling out to them from the shore, and Peter threw his clothes on and leapt into the water to make his way quickly to Jesus, Jesus called out to him, not the new name that had been conferred upon him when he was called to be the rock upon which the church would be built. Instead, Jesus called him by his given name, Simon, son of John, the name he went by before he even met Jesus. And maybe this was a gentle gesture on Jesus' part. You might recall that Peter denied Jesus 3 times around a similar campfire prior to Jesus' death. Here, Jesus might have been saying to Peter in the most tender way, let's start over again. Peter knew that he had betrayed Jesus. Yet Jesus approached him on that shore that morning and extended the invitation 3 times for Peter to affirm his love for Jesus. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And upon asking Peter that 3rd time if he loved Jesus, Peter felt hurt. He felt the sting of being asked this question 3 times in succession because he knew the truth. And even so, Jesus was giving him a second chance. Jesus still entrusted and commissioned Peter to feed his lambs, to tend his sheep, and to feed his sheep. It's pure grace, even to the one who had betrayed Jesus. Peter was once again invited into that inner circle and given a fresh start to continue the work with the whole community. Jesus too believed that his friends and the world could be transformed by the pure gentleness of love. This story has reminded me once again this week of how often I fail to find and see and sense Jesus in those ordinary moments. I get busy, I get so focused on the bigger things, or what I think are the bigger things. And what might I be missing along the way in those smaller, more ordinary, common moments? What might it look like for us to try to tune our eyes to see and our ears to hear through the filter of gentle and tender love? Where might we need to offer second chances to friends who have disappointed or betrayed us? Where might we need to seek opportunities to lean into the offering of second chances to us when we have disappointed or betrayed our beloveds in some way? And I wonder how we might be changed if we take this practice of gentle and tender love seriously, so that we begin to feel like the disciples when they went out fishing that night, that automatic muscle memory in body, mind, and spirit, carrying us forward, enabling us to go places that we didn't even think we were ready to go, giving us courage to step into a world in ways that we hadn't even imagined possible on our own. The very beginning of our text tonight, Peter called out to the disciples, "I'm going fishing." And they responded, "We'll go with you." As we go into this week, I'm going to try to walk a little more slowly, to attend to the beloved children of God who are in front of me, to try to expand my own ability to see and hear and live in this gentleness of love. And maybe I'll see you along that path, at breakfast or lunch, as a mercy mover accompanying our friends in transitions, alongside each other as we seek help or healing, bearing one another's burdens when we have failed or fallen short, wherever the twists and turns of the week may take us. And every single day, I give thanks that this path is filled with beloved friends, like those of you in this very circle, as we all aim to live in this gentle and tender love. Amen.
She would welcome my stories when I would come in after scout camp, and I would peel back my socks to reveal that the color of my leg was super brown, and I would attend to that and unpack and begin to tell stories of people like Damon, who was in the van on the way back from Philmont Scout camp, and he had a soda that he didn't want anymore, and he was going to pour it out the back window of the van, 15-passenger van, and he began to pour it, and it covered his own face and the face of the 6 people around him. This Coke everywhere. I told stories of fire mishaps and food that went awry. And when I would come in from getting all cleaned off and telling these stories, I would be welcomed by Kay, my mom, with a grilled cheese sandwich. Every camp out, every camp. I was welcomed by a story, or my stories were welcomed by Natalie, who several years later, I lived in Bill and Natalie's house in Houston, Texas, and they were Rush Limbaugh fans when it was just becoming cool in the South to be Rush Limbaugh fans, and I was not so much of that. I had journeyed off for one of my first trips with the youth choir, and on that trip, as a van driver on the trip, this was before cell phones and GPS, I got us lost driving up to Colorado. 6 hours off the path. And there was a big bus with the choir, the rest of the choir, and we had all the music and a couple of soloists, and the rest of the bus ended up in Boulder, and our band did not in time. We arrived just after the concert was over. So I returned back to Houston thinking my job was over. This is my first year in ministry, and I came into the kitchen where Natalie, this amazing, graceful woman, welcomed me with bean soup. And I retained my job and learned a lot more. And I lived with them for another 2 years after my internship was over. They continued to welcome my story over and I've been welcomed. My story has been welcomed so many times when I have not deserved it. Jesus spoke these words that can be haunting. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And the reason why he asks in this passage from today isn't as a test, but as an invitation to act like you love me. Would you act like you love me? Act like you love me? And so oftentimes, when I think about this table, I realize I'm not acting like I love you, Jesus. I'm not acting like it. I don't deserve this space. And so I'm grateful that the story, even before that question, is a welcome of the stories. When Jesus says, come in from the lake, he welcomed their story, and he acted like he loved the disciples. He welcomed them. And so this mundane thing, this ordinary bread and this ordinary cup, is this muscle memory of welcome. Reminding one another that we are the beloved. Even when we don't act like it, we are the beloved. We don't know exactly what happened on that night, but we read that Jesus was with his disciples, and he gathered them together, and he offered thanks for the bread, and he broke it, saying, "This is my body broken for you. Take and eat in remembrance of me." In a similar way, He took the wine on the table and he poured it out for his disciples, his friends, and he said, "This is the blood of the new covenant poured out for you. Drink this in remembrance of me." Would you pray with me? Beautiful God, we are a mess, individually and collectively. You invite us to act like we follow you, and sometimes we mess up. We are grateful for your continual invitation and welcome at this table, for the ways that you act like, even when you're speaking harshly, you act like you love us. May it be so this evening. Amen.